All right, so we're going to get into a little more distributive property because I think that there's a couple of pieces that might still give you trouble. So let's talk about that. And let's say that we have a distributive property problem that looks something like this. We have 4 plus 3 times 2n minus 1. So if we're going to use our distributive property here, the 4 is not part of that distributive property. Because remember, when we're using our distributive property, the number that's outside the parentheses is going to be distributed to what's inside the parentheses. So when we distribute, we're going to end up with positive 3 times 2n. And then we're going to end up with, if we bring this sign down, positive 3 times 1, which would give us 4 plus 6n minus 3. Then we would combine our like terms, our 4 and our negative 3, and we would get 1 plus 6n. And that's how this problem would end. Here's what a different problem might look like. You might have something that looks like this. 4n times 3n minus 6. And again, we're going to distribute, so the 4n is going to be multiplying each of these pieces. But when we multiply 4n times 3n, we'll rewrite the rest of it. Okay, 4n times 3n, well, 4 times 3 we know is 12. N times n is n squared. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. And then this would be minus 24n. And that would be your completed version of your distributive property. But you remember, we talked about this in the past, where you have something like a to the third power times a to the fourth power. And we said that's basically like saying that you have a times a times a, that's your a to the third. And a to the fourth is going to be a times a times a times a. So if we look at this that way, we have a times itself 7 times. So this is going to be a to the 7th power. And we said you can think of it as though you're just adding the exponents. We don't like to actually say that because we're not really adding here, but it's a way to remember what to do. But when we do that with the distributive property problem we just did, you have to remember, even though 4n doesn't have an exponent, the exponent of the n is a 1. The exponent of the 3n is a 1. So when you get to this 2, you're getting that because you have 1n here times 1n here would be n times n, which is n squared. A problem that looks like this, where it doesn't appear that there's a number that you're going to be distributing. And you're right, when you look at this, it doesn't appear that there is. But remember, anytime that you have no number in front of a variable, you can always put a 1 there. And we're going to do the same thing here because we're really going to be able to distribute a negative 1 in this case. Because remember, multiplying by 1 never changes the value. So here we're able to distribute a negative 1. So our 6 is going to stay here. And then we have negative 1 times 4c. And again, if we bring down this sign, then we have negative 1 times 9. So we're going to have 6 minus 4c minus 9. And then we would combine our like terms and end up with a negative 3 minus 4c. And we'd like to kind of neaten that up, so we'll make it a negative 4c minus 3. That's just putting things in standard form, which you'll learn about at a later time. Okay, but that's one of the things that we have to kind of take into account is whenever there's a negative sign out in front, it's going to be a negative 1 that gets distributed. Now, I keep saying that we can do this and we'll bring this sign down, right? If we just bring that sign down. I know some students prefer to do this a different way. What they like to do is, let me show you on a clean page, if they had something like 2 minus 3 times 4n minus 6, They like to distribute this way. So they're going to do negative 3 times 4n, and then negative 3 times negative 6, which is perfectly fine, because what they're doing actually is they're thinking of this in here as two separate terms, which is really a good way to think of it. And either way that you do this, you're going to get the right answer. So let's stick with this, and we'll say we're going to get 2, and then that's negative 12n, and plus 18, and then we'll combine our 18 and our 2, and that would give us 20 minus 12n.